Hi everyone, I'm Kate Leventhal. I'm CorStone's Chief Program Officer, and CorStone's an international NGO that develops, conducts, and evaluates emotional resilience programs for marginalized youth worldwide. And I'm here today to talk to you about our newest program, inREACH. In this presentation, I'm going to introduce you to inREACH, which is a fully remote emotional resilience program that we've developed for low and middle income country youth. So inREACH is so new that we haven't actually launched it yet, and the first instance of it is set to roll out in Bihar, India in the next few weeks. And so one of the major goals of this presentation is to take you behind the scenes with the development, because we feel like that's a really important thing to share with one another of what actually happens for us and what we've learned and what strategies we've used for developing in such a difficult situation, as I know so many of you attending this presentation have probably encountered as well. So in this presentation, I'll tell you about what inREACH is, then I'll tell you more about how we developed it, and then look ahead to what's next. And so we'll start in with a little bit about what inREACH is. So just as a little bit of background, I'd like to take you back about a year ago to when the pandemic had first started around April-May 2020. And I would like to just start with this quote, as I think it's critical to note that even at that time, there were real predictions that COVID-19 would become much more than just a physical health crisis. And so I'll take just a moment to read this quote to you. This is from a UN policy brief about a year ago. Although the COVID-19 crisis is, in the first instance, a physical health crisis, it has the seeds of a major mental health crisis as well, if action is not taken. And unfortunately, this has absolutely ended up being the case, and particularly for marginalized and otherwise underserved populations. For example, an October 2020 systematic review of mental health effects of the pandemic found that, on average, studies found that 41% of the population in South Asia was facing anxiety and 34% was facing depression. And these effects have been even more pronounced for youth. For example, a recent survey by Plan International among 7,000 girls in 14 countries found that 88% of them was reporting experiencing high or medium levels of anxiety. And so what we looked at and what we realized was needed during this time is to have evidence-based, scalable mental health responses to support youth during this time and beyond. And what is particularly critical as well is that they are accessible to youth, that these solutions are accessible to youth during this time period, which is not always the case in the interventions that are already available. Smartphone and internet access are extremely low, for instance, in the areas where we work, as you'll see. I'll go into that in a moment. So this in particular really represents a major hurdle to doing remote mental health programs, remote resilience programs for youth. Our response in this situation was to develop a program called inREACH. And inREACH is a highly accessible, multi-platform program that supports youth mental well-being, growth, and thriving. And the hope is that this will be accessible both during COVID as well as after COVID as a solution that will be adaptable to many different situations and many different hard-to-reach contexts. inREACH has 4 program components. It includes aspects that allow kids to be exposed to new concepts to help build resilience, like, for instance, character strengths, goal setting, emotional intelligence, and communication. It also allows for self-discovery and applications to kids' own lives and learning about themselves, as well as moments for support and guidance, because we know that these are really new topics for kids sometimes, and it's really important that they are connected with people who are able to help them understand and help them to apply them to their lives. It also includes aspects of community building, which helps kids to access and leverage peer connections and build leadership around these issues. inREACH covers a number of core concepts that research has shown is really critical to supporting adolescents in particular, but also other populations during crisis. For example, emotion regulation and management, mindfulness, compassion and self-compassion, growth mindset, goals, problem solving, communication and leadership, and character strengths and personal values. Throughout, we weave two sub-themes, equality for all, and leveraging and building youth's helping identities. So helping them to feel that they are able to help others and that is a really key component of who they are as people. These concepts are applied both to COVID-19 specific issues as well as daily concerns that are critical for low and middle income country youth, such as achieving educational goals and staying healthy. And I think that we could probably all agree, just from our own personal experience, that getting through the difficulties of COVID-19 has been about more than just dealing with the issues regarding COVID-19 and also about how one can live the difficulties within their daily lives that may or may not be exactly precipitated by COVID-19. But research also supports this and shows that it's important to both support kids and people to navigate issues that are specific to whichever challenge or crisis they're dealing with, as well as their daily concerns that may have been there before and may continue to be there after the crisis. We designed inREACH to be easily adapted to new settings depending on what technology access kids have in whatever setting. So here you can see the different components of inREACH: exposure to concepts, self-discovery, and the like. And materials can be made completely low-tech, for example, in exposure to concepts, comics and printed comics and infographics, all the way up to high-tech online videos. And so we have a continuum of easily adaptable materials that can be adapted to different levels of technology access for youth, just based on what is available in the setting. The first place where we're planning to roll out inREACH is in Bihar, India, which is India's third most populous state. It's a state of 105 million people, and unfortunately a third of the residents there, it's quite a poor state, are living below the poverty line. It's also quite a difficult state, a difficult place to be a girl or a woman, as 2 out of 3 girls are married before the age of 18. Child marriage is very common, and there's a good amount of physical or sexual violence and discrimination against women and girls. COVID has also been quite difficult in Bihar, and even recently, within the last month, there has been an increase in new COVID cases of 100 times. So it's absolutely still a top of mind issue for those living in Bihar. In addition, as I mentioned before, technology access represents a huge hurdle. And this is the case in many low and middle income country settings, but India is really no exception. For example, 1 in 4 households only have internet access, and this is highly gendered, particularly for mobile internet, as only half as many women as men can access mobile internet. In terms of students for mobile internet and smartphone access, that's even less. That's only 1 in 8 students have that access. However, there are other ways to reach people that are different, lower tech means, but still leveraging the technologies that are available in the population. For example, through radio, there is quite a bit of radio access for India's population, and also through feature phones. So even in rural Bihar, which is where we're going to be rolling out this first pilot, 85% of youth have used some sort of mobile phone in the past week. That might be a feature phone, might be a smartphone, might be theirs, might be their parents, might be their friends, but they're still getting access in some way. So what we decided to do for Bihar is to assume essentially a mid-tech option. So we would assume that kids would have feature phone access, not all the time, but at least intermittently, and no internet. And so there are 4 components of the participant experience, and these map to the components of the program that you've seen before in previous slides, the exposure to concepts, self-discovery, and the like. So you'll see a key at the bottom of this slide. We have a handbook which helps kids to be exposed to concepts and gain ways to apply these to their lives through comics and stories, as well as guided fun activities and a gamified experience in which they're going through unlocking secret codes and things like that. We'll also be doing a podcast, which during this particular instance is by phone, but can be easily adapted to radio for future settings. These will include shows in which kids are able to share their experiences with one another, as well as pre-scripted narrative shows. And these are led by youth leaders from the community. We also have a WhatsApp chat and a phone hotline so that kids have just different options to access us. Each one of these has 2 different aspects to them. One is automated, pre-recorded for kids to help get exposed to concepts and apply things to their lives more and more, as well as times that we're available, that the youth leaders are available to provide live one-on-one support to kids through WhatsApp and through the phone. So that is what inREACH is, but now I really want to take you behind the scenes a little bit to how we developed it. So first, when we were developing inREACH, we do other programs in Bihar and had done other programs in Bihar prior to the COVID pandemic. And so we took an idea from there that yes, we were going to try to do an emotional resilience program, that we were going to use some of our evidence-based materials from our previous programs as our initial starting idea. We then did an informal literature scan to test some of our assumptions, for instance, about technology access, what works and doesn't work in these kinds of populations and these kinds of programs in other settings. We then had a number of brainstorming sessions with local program experts on our staff to create a general program outline, which we then ran by an expert advisory group. And this was a very limited engagement in which we essentially showed them the outline and we asked them to give us insights into the things that we just don't know about. For example, we've never done WhatsApp bots before or hotlines, and what's the crash course of what we really need to know, and then what do they think in general about the program. So that was a hugely important step to the development. We then assembled teams of local experts from our own staff, as well as subject matter experts from our staff and outside, and instructional designers to help to create the materials. So we had multiple teams going at one time to create all the different materials that were required. We then did rapid user testing, which I've mentioned here is modified because the users here were actually staff members who had sort of their hats on as thinking through what kids in this population, whom they're very familiar with, would be thinking and would be having trouble with or enjoying while going through the program. So they did a good amount of testing in those sorts of role-playing roles. And then we are now ready to launch the pilot, and as I mentioned, that should be within a few weeks. Okay, so that previous slide looked really linear, and we did do that, but let me also tell you what it was really like behind the scenes and some of the things that really helped us to make that happen and make that all happen. So we started out in our usual linear fashion, which I think many of us are used to, and where we were thinking, all right, let's define carefully what the problem is, let's analyze very carefully what to do about it, and think through how to respond. We'll debate it quite a bit, we'll make a very clear plan, and then we'll know exactly what we're trying to test and what we're trying to find out. In any case, we quickly realized that those ways of working together and those ways of making decisions that we were used to on something that had so many new moving parts to develop all at once, in a situation that seemed to be very urgent but also rapidly changing, where no one seemed to know the right answers, we realized that those ways of working were just not going to get us there. And that's when we started to look into theories of leadership in complexity. And we started really following one of the frameworks that we found that resonated with us, the Cunningham framework from Snowden and Boone. Now, this is a funny representation, but I will say it's I think it's somewhat true to life, and I'll take you through it. The framework ended up being very helpful for us as leaders during this time, and I'm hopeful that it will be for you as well. So there are 4 situations here, and each is characterized slightly differently in terms of the situations that you might encounter as leaders. So the clear situation is a situation that is known and familiar. There are repeating patterns, consistent events, there are clear cause and effect relationships that are evident to everyone or nearly everyone who is part of making whatever it is happen. A right answer exists. This is the realm of known knowns, and where as a leader, your role is to be more about fact-based management. This is how it is, and this is the process that we follow. In the complicated situation, this is an area where it's much more about things that are unfamiliar, but they are knowable. There is expert diagnosis perhaps required. There are cause and effect relationships. They're discoverable, but they're not immediately apparent to everyone, and there's often more than one right answer possible. This is the area of known knowns, where we know what it is that we need to learn, and we know that we don't know something, and so we need to find out about those and investigate. In the complex situation, and this is the situation in which I think most of us find ourselves, and it is uncomfortable during COVID. It's characterized by flux, unpredictability, there are no right answers. It's more about emerging instructive patterns to tell you where to go. This is a realm of unknown unknowns, where you don't know what you don't know, and those become apparent, but it takes probing and trying things out to even find out, oh my goodness, we didn't even know we needed to know this. There's a real need for creative and innovative approaches in these kinds of settings, and this is a place where it's much more about pattern-based leadership. In the chaotic situation, which I think the COVID situation does border on for some of us at some times, this is characterized by high turbulence, there are no clear cause and effect relationships, and so there's not really any point in looking for right answers. This is the realm of unknowables. It's just going to be impossible to know things about this situation, and yet you have many decisions to make, no time to think, high tension. Again, this is going to be an area of pattern-based leadership. And we were really used to working mainly in the realms of the clear and the complicated, as I think many of you on this presentation might be as well. And we really recognized after finding this framework that leadership and decision making for us were going to need to shift, and we realized we were in a complex situation, at times bordering on chaotic, and it was really important that we approach the situation differently. And so according to the Cunningham framework, in which the job of the leader is to do a number of things, we followed that it was important for us to probe and then sense and then respond. And that means essentially creating environments and small experiments that allow patterns to start emerging, and not assuming that we'll have everything perfect before we go to do those experiments, because those experiments are in order to help us find out what we need in order to plan, and to plan well. We also on our team needed to really increase our levels of interaction and communication, which of course is difficult when we're all remote, but needed to continue to increase that so that we could move as one in this very complex situation. We also needed to use methods that could help generate ideas, so opening up discussion through creative methods, encouraging disagreement, encouraging diversity, and at the same time setting clear parameters so that people feel confident brainstorming within those parameters. We also used approaches that encouraged interaction over and over and over again as patterns started to emerge. In order to do this, we actually introduced a number of really new ways of working that helped us all to come together quickly to create this program. These worked really well, even across time zones, cultures, multiple overlapping teams with lots of different aspects of their expertise. And so one of the things we used was an unknowns log, where we moved questions and unknowns that we had from being completely unknown towards more and more unknown as we found out more about them. We used a decision log as well as a different decision framework. We made sure that anybody on the team, every single person, was empowered and felt they could make any decision that they needed to in order to make the program move forward and the development move forward. However, all that they had to do was inform everybody of that decision, and so it was a very different manner of making decisions. We held many team brainstorm sessions with creative prompts and used lots of methods to stay in sync and know what everybody was working on, like having proactive updates and stand-ups, many things taken also from agile methodologies. And these were hugely useful for us in being able to develop a really complicated program in a very short period of time with lots and lots of people working on it in a complex, volatile situation. So, what's next for inREACH? Well, first, we're going to be in Bihar, India, as I mentioned, mainly looking at the acceptability, adoption, and feasibility of the program. That's going to start within just a couple of weeks with about 100 to 150 kids. Potentially, our next rollout is going to be in Jharkhand, India, the neighboring state, where we'll expand with 3,000 to 5,000 kids and start to look a little bit at changes that happen for youth. In the future, we really hope to expand and adapt to other contexts to examine efficacy and effectiveness of the program, as well as the processes that are required for scale in diverse settings, urban, rural, diverse country and cultural contexts. So thank you so much for letting me tell you a bit about inREACH and how we developed it. I'm really looking forward to your questions. Thanks again.